So the first thing you have to do when creating a TKinter interface is create a window, which you do by instantiating the TKinter library. Actually, it says just TK when we do it. And then you create a frame, and then you start dropping objects inside the frame. So just as an example of something that would have been nice to be putting into our applications, would have been something like this. Well, let's import the library, import TKinter. Now let's make a window. Window equals capital T, lowercase k. Now we're not going to even see anything at this point, or not much if I run it. W for window. My mistake. From TKinter, import asterisk. And just because I've done this often enough to see this quirk, we're going to add one more. We're going to say from TKinter, import asterisk, comma, message box. And it's ludicrous to have to do that. I haven't figured out why we have to do that. But when we use the message box class, it always says, or half the time for half the students, often for me, that it can't find it unless I tack that on there. All right, so, error. Okay, that is not the correct syntax. Okay, next line then. From TKinter, import message box. Okay, so it created a window. You can hide the window and you can show the window. I'm going to hide the window just because I'm going to pop up a message box. This is not the main part of the user interface lesson. But if we do in other languages, it's called hide, but Mr. Python is interesting, so it's going to be withdraw. And then we're going to display a message box. Message box is just a dialog on the window. I don't know who came up with the term message box. Probably the late 70s. Mac or the Windows developers. So save equals message box, all lowercase, dot, ask, okay, cancel, parentheses, quote, Python, end quote, comma, would you like to save the data, question mark, end quote, in parentheses. And you know why I've broken on 2 lines. You don't have to do that. And it ran. It looks so much like the document must be saved before you ran it that I clicked off it. But would you like to save the data? Okay, or cancel. Well, what is that returning? It's returning a Boolean value. So if we print, quote, save equals, end quote, comma, save, just to see the value of that variable, the value that was returned. I click OK, save was set to true. What if I click cancel? Save is equal to false. Just about what you would expect, right? True, false, whether I want to save or not. Message box has all sorts of variants. There's one that has 3 different options. I don't know if y'all are old enough to remember abort, retry, fail. What? I don't know which one of these I'm supposed to choose. What does it mean to choose fail, right? Do I want my program to fail? Anyways, 3 different choices there. We could show an error. We could show a warning. We could show info. Those all sound about like what you mean, what you would think. like if save equals false, which a more experienced programmer would say something like if not save colon. We're going to display an error message. Message box dot show error parentheses quote end quote comma quote goodbye data end quote in parentheses. So if they choose false, goodbye data, they didn't save the data. Not a bad thing to throw up cool little user interfaces like that, but if it needs to be programmed, if it needs to be handled entirely through the terminal, right? If something you're going to be using SSH to dial into a remote machine, you would not want to be popping up dialogues like that, most likely. And along with show error, there's show info and show warning. And what does that change? Just change the little icon, right? It was a red error, and if you change it to warning, it makes it a yellow construction sign, and if you change it to info, it puts a blue circle with an I question mark. Now, some graphics libraries allow you to change the look and feel of the library components. I do not believe that Python does that. So, along with ask OK cancel, there are other variants. Trying to remember the one that's equivalent to abort, retry, fail. I'm not seeing the third one, the 3-question variant. What happens if we close it without picking anything? That is a possibility. I don't know what I'm going to do. The one that didn't come to my mind, the one that I didn't find with the 10-second Google search, was it returned true if you chose yes, it returned false if you chose no, and it returned the none value if you chose cancel. So you'd have to check all 3 possibilities from that dialog. Okay. That's about enough of that. Let's create another window. And as a matter of fact, we may want to comment that out so that we don't have to answer those questions every single time we run it, right? Let's put a button on the screen. Because if you're not letting them trigger a behavior, it's probably not going to be very cool. So, and by the way, when you go online, the examples are going to show things like root rather than window, or master rather than window. I like the term window because it's extraordinarily clear as to what is being created, right? So you'll see those other terms used an awful lot. We have to create a frame. We didn't create a frame for this one, but you have to create a frame before you can start adding things to the frame. And a frame just creates, a playing field inside that window. Until you do that, you don't have a place where you can drop your buttons. So frame equals frame, capital F, parentheses, window. And then we need to pack it. There's 2 user interface managers, positioning managers. There may be more, but one's called the grid manager, where you put things in a grid effectively, and then one uses pack. And what pack is you just start slapping things on there, and then you hit pack and they appear. And as the term pack maybe implies, maybe not, it shrinks the window to its smallest state to hold all that stuff. So after we draw our button and then call pack, it's going to shrink down to nothing. So frame.pack, parentheses in parentheses. Now run it. Okay, that's pretty small. That's because we haven't added any components to our frame, so it packed down to nothing. these things are resizable. If we wanted to pad it a little bit so that it didn't pack away completely to nothing, pad x equals 10, comma, pad y equals 10. It may still pack away to completely nothing if there's nothing inside it to use a padding. Let's find out. Okay, we can see a difference, right? Padding is nice because without that, frame really does condense it down to the absolute minimum. And we're not used to seeing dialogues that, maybe if you're an Amiga, user, back in the 80s, you saw dialogues where everything was crammed together with no space between the buttons. But other than that, so let's add a button. Button 1, B1 if we wanted to be short. Let's not be too short because we'd like for this, if you come back to it later. Equals button with a capital B, parentheses. And yeah, I'm looking at my notes to make sure I don't botch it for y'all. Because if I do it entirely by memory, I mess things up. Frame, comma, that's where I want to drop it. You could conceivably have more than one frame. You could also certainly have more than one window going on at the same time. The text of our button. Text equals, quote, click me, end quote. And what command is it going to run? We're going to make it call a function called clicked. Now, we haven't written that function yet. Notice I said it was a function, but what have we always done when we had a function? We did that. Not that you can see. Yeah, there's a closed parentheses at the end of that. But that would invoke that function immediately, right? Just like if you called an input function and then you passed its result in as an argument to the float function, right? That would invoke it immediately. We don't want to invoke that function. We want to wait until that button is clicked. It's called a callback function, right? Because we say we want that to work, and then we let the user interface run, and the user interface calls that function if the button gets clicked. So I don't know how fancy we want to get with this. I don't know if we want to create a main and stuff like that, which I should have been, enforcing as a discipline the entire time. Define main and stuff like that. Let's do a little bit of that, but not put that W, if __ business. And then down at the bottom of it, I'm going to call main. I need to break this on the next line. It's causing a lot of scrolling. All right, so you see what we did there, right? We defined a function and we called it. The only reason I did that is so that all the functions I write will be loaded into memory before a single thing happens, right? Because every function you define just gets loaded into memory waiting to be summoned. And it's not until you actually call a function with some unindented code that things start rolling. So def clicked, parentheses in parentheses, colon, print parentheses, I've been clicked, end exclamation, end quote, end parentheses. Other professors get away with turning the screen and blocking the view of half the students in the front row. So we run it. I forgot to add the button. I forgot to pack the button. Without packing the button, you don't get to see it. I wonder if we could do this. Right there. Never tried that before. What do you know? It worked. You can do it in one step rather than two. That's kind of nice. All my examples that I've written in the past and that I've seen on the net pretty much do it like this. Button 1.pack. I like the idea of creating the button and then showing it immediately. But one reason to not do it that way is if you're using the grid manager to put things down, then that .pack would be a very bad thing to do. Because once you invoke one of them, you can't start using the other. You create a grid, you can no longer start packing, or vice versa, unless you create another frame. So there's a reason to not do it that way, the way that I just demonstrated. All right, click me. I've been clicked. serious error in it. X equals 1 divided by 0. We're probably familiar with the concept that if you divide by 0, it crashes your program. It kept my window up here. It didn't kill my window, even though I had an exception. That's because it's running in a separate thread. Python supports threads as well as C++ or Java or any other language. And what is thread? It's kind of a sub-process. You're used to the idea of multiple processes. You know, if we went down to the task manager, we'd see, you know, that we had 80 processes running at the same time. And nowadays, you know, chips are multi-core chips so that they can actually be running those processes at the same time. Before multi-core chips, it just task swapped very fast between your processes. And if one of them decided not to let go, right, not to, you know, allow itself to be swapped out, then you get to that weird state you probably remember if you're a user of old versions of Windows. You drag your dialog around and it would create a trail, right? And you couldn't close it, you couldn't click on anything on it, you know, because it was no longer responding to anything, and nothing else was happening either because the task manager was not swapping things in and out. It was called cooperative tasking, cooperative multitasking. But a thread is when you have two things going on in the same program, or three or four, so that, you know, when I click me, something happened in the background. It may have launched another window if I'd wanted to. That'd be kind of fun and annoying. Let's create another window. Get rid of that x is equal to 1 divided by 0. Window 2 is equal to TK. That's enough to prove the point. We're not going to add more stuff to it, right? All right, and so every time I click me, it creates another thread with another window. And you've seen stuff like that in your usage of programs. You click a button and it goes and opens a file, save dialog or whatever. Okay, so that demonstrates putting a button on the screen and creating a callback function. That's well and good, but quite often you want to put more stuff on the screen than just one button. We could add 2 buttons, we could add 3 buttons, we could add 4 buttons, but you get the idea just from that demonstration. Putting data on the screen is awfully cool though, right? Not just a button. Trying to decide whether to comment this out. I may do that. Otherwise, we're going to get to the point where we have to close one thing before we go to the next. Oh, I forgot to do one final thing after this. It is proper to call window.main loop, parentheses in parentheses, which stops the processing right then and there until they close the window. If we added a print parentheses quote done after that, we would not see the done message until after they close the window. So main loop tells it, okay, you got to deal with that window, and we're not going to continue processing until that window dies. Right, then it finally said done. You know, if we just change the name of the function, then we could, you know, go on with reckless abandon, adding more functions to this. I don't know if that would be more confusing or not. Why don't we, you know what I did last time is I just made people make multiple files. So why don't we make a lecture W2. So guess what we need at the top of it? From TKinter. Import asterisk. If we're going to use the message box, we need to import that as well. I've never Googled why that's necessary. That doesn't always seem to be the case, but it's the case often enough. It's kind of like voodoo. Voodoo programming or cargo cult programming is when you put something in a program just because you hope it works and you don't know why you're doing it. It just worked one time in the past. So we're going to create a window, and then we're going to drop some things into it. Some text boxes, which are known as labels, and then some entry boxes where somebody could type something in.
Does that need to say import message box?
Yes, it does. Thank you. From TKinter, import message box. All right, same business. We're going to create a window. We're going to create a frame, and we're going to start adding things to it. Window equals capital T, lowercase k. Frame equals capital F, R-A-M-E, and our parameter is window. We need to pack the frame. Of course, that'll shrink it away to nothing, but then we're going to start adding buttons, and it'll regrow as need be. Now let's put a place where we could add a label. L1 is going to be label 1 is equal to label. We have to attach it to our window. I wonder what would happen if we tried to attach it to a frame instead, because I just said that you could have multiple frames. I'm going to give it a shot. That's probably not correct. That should probably be window. Text equals first name, end quote, comma. Now that's about enough. And let's pack that. L1.pack, parentheses, in parentheses. Capital L label. All of these objects begin with a capital letter. Excuse me, all of these classes. That's also a common programming convention. All right. First name. That could be set to anything. Underneath it, we might want to put in a field where they could type in their first name. So for an input field, this library calls it an entry. So E1, or if we were choosing better variable names, it would be something like first name underscore entry or something like that to make it more readable. Entry. That did work, by the way, putting in frame rather than window, but I'm going to go ahead and change it back to window because all of my examples show that. That's enough. We need to pack that, E1.pack, and then call main loop. So window.main loop, parentheses, in parentheses. And there we go. Gives us a place to type. A little bit of padding would have been nice. Let's put some padding around the input dialog, since it seems to be the largest thing in there, and maybe that would pad everything else out. Although last time we put the padding inside the frame itself. But why not? Pad x equals 5, comma, pad y equals 5. And it added a little bit of space around it. And we could do a last name in an entry field for the last name. So why don't we just copy all this business and paste it and change L1 and E1 to L2 and E2 and first name to last name. So instead of L1, E1, excuse me, E2, E2. And this label is supposed to say last name. That's what we're supposed to type there. again, I need to be careful. Last time I got so enthused, I went for like an hour and a half before somebody warned me that we needed to go to our next classes. So Bob Roberts, there we go. It would be nifty if we obviously need a button. It'd be nice if we attached an event handler so that if we hit the enter key there, it would call the button. Right, we've seen things like that in our usage. And then a button that would, use those things. So button, right now let's just call it B1. B1 equals button, parentheses, text equals login, end quote, comma. We need to put our command, our function that it's going to call. And since I didn't put all of this inside a main, maybe I will. It doesn't take that long to tab everything over. I'm going to go all the way up to the top underneath the import statements. DEF, main, parentheses, in parentheses, colon. Then I'm going to take everything else and I'm going to tab it over. And the reason I'm doing this is so that it's real easy to define the function and not just have it, need to be above everything. If you don't do things this way, then your functions need to be defined positionally so that they are defined before they are called. So after my main, DEF main, it's about time to make sure that nobody has typos. All right, and so the command, the function that it invokes, is called login. So we're going to write a login function. Now this isn't going to run until we put a call to main underneath it all, and we still haven't written the login function, so it's about time to do that. But at least run it and tell me that whether you have syntax errors at this point, because the rest of it's not going to work if we don't fix them. So why don't we do that first? DEF login, parentheses in parentheses colon, message box dot show info. We can leave things off. Now that I've done that, you may not be seeing this if you're using an editor other than idle. It's listing the parameters that I need to fill in, but if it says none, that's a default value. So let's just put the message. Message equals you are now logged in, or login complete, something like that. And until we actually invoke main, ain't nothing going to happen. So back tabbed against the edge of the window, get some margin, run it. I forgot to pack my button, and I did that the last time too. Go here. And before window main loop, b1.pack. What could we do to make this look a little bit better? We might want to put the input fields next to the labels. I guess I left a word off my login message. You are logged. All right. So the frame command, the pack command, lets us specify which side we want things to be packed. Do we want something to be pushed on the left or on the right? So way up here where it says first name, L1.pack, I want that to be on the left, right? Name, and then on the right is going to be the input field. And a name, and on, so, side, not sewed, side equals, and in all caps, left, add that to the L1.pack, and on E1.pack, add comma, side equals right. All right, that kind of broke the rest of it, right? Last name was left up here, and there was an input field here, but we need to go and we need to add those same things to the calls to L2 pack and E2 pack. So L2 pack, side equals left. And E2 pack, side equals right. And if you got behind, we just modified that line, that line, that line, and that line. Alrighty. My example's looking really lame there. What did I do wrong? Well, my example shows us rearranging things. We're going to cut the creation of L2, or at least it's packing. Let's do that, and paste it immediately under the creation and packing of L1. You're going to like the grid manager better, so this will be the last time we use pack. So I'm going to cut L2 creation, go here. So I just move these two lines. And the same thing for E1 and E2. And if this doesn't work, we're going to drop it and go to the grid manager anyways. Yeah, come on, guys. I said that, but now I'm furious. Alright, we could fix that by putting everything in a separate frame. If we create a separate frame before the E1 and the E2, then those things will be in their own level. Almost tempted just to blow past this so that we can start using a grid manager. Why don't we do that? I'm going to just remove the sides commands to get it back to a working state. But if we had been attaching things to a frame instead of window, like if I did L1 is equal to, or label frame, and then L2 is equal to label frame, and then I created a second frame, and I created those against the second frame, frame 2. You know what, it would not have taken that long to get it to work. Alright. Hit undo until you get your side commands back. Sorry about that, guys. So this needs to be all added to the frame rather than the window. And it's funny how I waffled on that, and then now I remember that that's what you got to do. So L1 and L2 go inside the frames rather than inside the window. And here we need to make a new frame. Why not just call it frame 2? Nah. This is about time to punt on this. I do not want to create this anymore. In fact, I've totally botched this example. Bad example. I messed it up. I apologize. Should have consulted my notes a little bit too well. I mean, a little bit more. Alright, I think that's looking good now. May not be looking good on yours, and I apologize for that error. We're going to use the grid manager because I've completely botched this. stab at fixing it, remove all the side commands. If you want to stay after and get it completely working, because I know I've made these changes quickly, yeah, I botched it. I must still have a side command botched. Yeah. All right, we're moving on. I hope you don't have any syntax errors. If you do, just comment out the whole thing. Instead, we're going to create a main2 now. def main2, parentheses in parentheses colon, and this demonstrates the grid manager. So guess what we got to do? We got to create a window. And if you're using the grid manager, you don't even have to make any frames. I assume you still can if that's how you want to organize it. But window equals capital T, lowercase k. Let's make our labels. L1 is equal to capital L label, parentheses, quote, first name, in parentheses. And then we want to call the grid manager. We could do hit enter L1.grid, but why not just do it right here? And we're going to set this item to show up in, well, guess what? Just like everything else in programming, we start counting at 0 rather than 1. And then let's make another label that says second or last name, and we're going to stick that on row 1. So L2 equals label, parentheses, quote, second name, in parentheses, end quote, in parentheses, dot, grid 1. Now let's create our entries. And you may think to yourself, well, if it's a grid, it's got, you know, x and y coordinates, and we're only seeing y coordinates there. We need to specify what row we're showing up in. So change that to row equals 0 and row equals 1. And if we wanted to, we could go ahead and say column equals 0 on both of these because we want them lined up in the same column. But if you leave off that spec, it defaults to 0. But I don't mind specifying it. So row equals 0, col equals 0. Row equals 1, col equals 0. You know why I didn't type row equal col equals 1 even though I started to? Because we want them in the same column. Now let's make 2 entries. E1 equals entry, parentheses. And what data are we going to fill it with? Maybe just a blank. And then E2 equals entry. And gosh, I'm botching this. I really should be eyeballing my example really well. What have I done wrong? We've created entries often enough, and we could scroll up. Somebody could tell me what I did wrong with my label creations here.
You did frame?
I did not, well, right, I did not create a frame. Using Grid Manager, you don't need to create a frame. You better at least say what window you're going to attach it to. So L1 equals label, parentheses, window. L2 equals label, parentheses, window.
Does it need to be text equals on the first name, last name?
Yes. Just make us type them over again. Text equals first name. Text equals last name. And there we go. That is correct. Just like for entry. Entry does not have an empty quote in it. Instead, entry asks what window it's being attached to. I'm definitely going to have to pause it. So my mistakes, was forgetting to add the window parameter, the window argument, and I forgot to add text equals in front of the pieces of text. We could probably initialize our entries with some text, but I'm going to leave them as blank fields for now. Underneath it all, window.main loop, parentheses in parentheses. And down here, instead of calling main, we're going to call main2. It'll be a miracle if this works. Yep. And it's not call, it's column. Excuse me for abbreviating. Column. Column. So these lines change considerably. Row equals 0, column equals 0. Row equals 1, column equals 0. I forgot to specify in the grid where these were going to go, so they didn't show up. So I'm going to add .grid commands, and I'm going to set them equal to column 1 rather than column 0. So after E1 is equal to entry window, .grid, row equals 0, comma, column equals 1. And then E2, entry window, dot, grid, row equals 1, column equals 1.
Can you add the padding to these?
We could add some padding to them. What would happen if we added some padding right here? Pad equal x equals 10, comma, pad y equals 10. No. If we created a frame, then we could add the padding there. If you're feeling like it and you want to explore on your own while I help people with syntax errors, then create a frame, add some padding to it, and then attach all these labels to the frame. FR equals frame, add it to the window, pad x equals 10, pad y equals 10, and change all these windows to FR. Absolutely sure I've lost at least a third of the class there. That didn't work, so I'm going to undo it all. So much for padding. If you feel like getting it to work, that'd be cool. We could add padding to the individual items. You could say label pad x equals 1, pad y equals, pad x equals 10, pad y is equal to 10, and you'd have to do that to everything you created. I'll type it in that all and do it. Pad x equals 10, pad y equals 10, right? And I should have been after the window position because this is the only mandatory piece. I'm going to stop messing with it. And grid. Window dot pack parentheses row pad x equals 10 comma pad y equals 10. What have I done
I
wrong?
still created a frame,
You did create a frame.
and then I packed the frame.
You packed the frame. Okay. Frame equals capital F, frame, parentheses window, frame dot pack, pad x equals 10, comma, pad y equals 10.
Then I changed the.
And then you changed everything to go to that frame. So all of these window calls need to be frame calls. Would have been faster to delete everything and start typing all over again. All right, it's a thing of beauty. Let's it's recording again, so we can get this going. Instead of first and second, I'm going to make that say first and last. I'm going to delete name. The only reason I'm making those changes is so that the entire line rests on the screen comfortably. All right, what good is an entry if you can't get the data out, right? We don't have a button. We don't have a function. And we're not getting the name out of those things. So we need to do all three. We're going to make a button. Login B for button. We're only going to have to type this login button once, so I don't mind making it a little bit longer. Login button equals capital B button. Attach it to the frame. Comma. Text equals quote login end quote comma. Command equals login comma we're going to change the color of the background of the button just because we're awesome. BG equals quote yellow end quote parentheses, and now I need to call the grid manager. This command has gotten so long, and I lied about only using the login button variable once because I'm going to call grid on it. So I'm just going to copy that variable, okay, come back down here, paste it, and call .grid. What row are we on now? We're on row 2 if we're lining everything up. Row equals 2. Column, where'd the n come from? Column equals 0, but I really want it to span 2. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to not do this, right? And there's my little login button. That's kind of lame. I could change it to column equals 1. That'd be a quick fix. Might even look better than what I'm about to do. After column equals 0, call span equals 2. Span 2 columns, not just 1. And you could do that to anything, not just a button. Or you could get an error. I keep thinking you can abbreviate it call. That's not true. Change that COL to the entire word column. Column. And there we go. It did minimize it, but we could change the way that looks. All right, let's get that information out. Let's get the first name and the last name out. So we're going to need to come up to the login function. And by the way, if you've green texted the login function out, ungreen it. Let's get the first name. Fname equals e1.get, parentheses, end parentheses.
Maybe capital E.
Yes, I do. Capital E1.get. Lname equals E2.get, parentheses. Let's create our message before we display it. Let's store it in a string variable. S equals E1, Fname plus quote space quote plus Lname plus quote space quote plus, well actually we don't need end it. So quote space is logged in, end quote, like that. And then change your message here just to reference that variable. So I just changed this line right here. If you felt like it, you could figure out how to make the entry box do password entry, where it fills it in with circles rather than the actual letters. I'm sure that it does that. I hadn't Googled how to do that. What if you want to set the text of the entry? That is, setting the text of the entry is really annoying. You have to delete the contents of the text, and then you have to insert it again. You would think there would be a dot set. Why the inventor of this library did not do that, I don't know. I'm not going to even demonstrate it now because there's one more thing I want to try to demonstrate. But we only have 10 minutes left. Do I really want to take off on this adventure? No, I don't, even though it's pretty important. We're going to have to hit this before we start our lectures on JavaScript. We'll spend, but it never hurts to mention something more than once. And it's going to wrap 2 lectures into one. We're going to use a class to create our user interface. And creating a class that contains all this information is the ideal way of creating a user interface, so that we could just, copy that class or import it and have it work. So, in that case, we do have time to change the entry. So after they log in, we're just going to change the value of E1. Maybe we'll blank it out. Nah, if we blank it out, you're not going to see change in the text of it.